Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable, I can't imagine a more direct and open statement than this, to the effect that all of American life has essentially been codified and commodified and boiled down to the equivalent of a fast food joint, somewhere where you go and you sort of schlep out increasingly more money for increasingly worse food, where standards are pointedly at a minimum, and really the only thing that matters is that we effectively subsist on kind of the lowest possible tier of commerce. I mean, I like a Big Mac as much as anybody else, but it's not the image that I get inspired by when I think about the supposedly highest authority, legislative authority in the land. Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. Thanks all for bearing with us last week as we took a week off. Hope you enjoyed Ryan's interview with Chris Rufo, but we are all back, baby. Summer is over. Everybody is returning from their various posts, flying back to the nest. We've got Seth Barron, managing editor, publisher and president Ryan Williams, and editor James Poulos. You can't see us, but we're all dressed in the uniform hoodie and basketball shorts, which will now become the standard issue Claremont Institute work attire. This is the privileges of
never. You take that
back. I take that back. I'm sorry. It's slander. It's dirty slander. Ryan's gonna have a word with me.
Yeah, to riff on an off-color joke from Tropic Thunder, you never go full Fetterman.
Yikes. Well, off to a good start here. We're not actually going to talk about Fetterman just yet, although he's definitely on the docket. We've got 2 weeks of stuff to cover since we were off, and we wanted to begin with the situation in Lampedusa. If you read Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe, a while back, then Lampedusa is perhaps a name that you will be familiar with. And also, if you're just somebody that follows migration and immigration and the great migration around the world, Lampedusa is a little teeny tiny island, really almost halfway between Sicily and northern Africa, Tunisia. And it is a kind of mass point of entry for all sorts of people leaving Africa and getting into really God knows where in Europe because of the travel that is possible within the European Union. Once you make it to Lampedusa, then you are ostensibly going to travel on to Sicily and Italy and on up into the continent. Within 2 days, this island has recently received 7,000 arrivals. This is an island with a local population of 6,000 Italians and now a total immigrant population of 18,000, so 3 times the local population. The mayor, Filippo Mannino, has said on Thursday that this is a point of no return. He said in the past 48 hours, around 7,000 people have arrived on my island, an island that has always welcomed and saved in its arms. Now we have reached a point of no return where the role played by this small rock in the middle of the Mediterranean has been put into crisis by the dramatic nature of this phenomenon. These migrants are typically described as having fled political persecution, upheaval and unrest in Tunisia. There's also some flooding in Libya that is cited as a cause of this, but those of us that follow this sort of know that these are often pretexts for economic migration. That's not always the case, but it is often the case. And speaking just more generally, there's clearly an unsustainable situation going on, has been going on for quite some time. This footage is particularly dramatic, but questions have been raised whether we're looking here at the future of American cities if we don't reverse course on our present apparently open borders policy in all but name. How doomerist are you guys about this? What do you make of the footage coming out of Lampedusa? And if anybody has comments about what this says vis-a-vis Maloney, the new populist leader that was supposed to have put an end to all of this, I would also love to hear them.
From what I gather, it doesn't seem like the recent arrivals at Lampedusa are North Africans, right? I mean, aren't they largely West Africans who have been, filtering up through Libya, Tunisia, Morocco in order to make this trip? In which case, and I don't really know if this is really what's happening, but I think the defense minister or the foreign minister of Italy said, "Look, this is an act of war. These people, this has all been arranged. This isn't, you know, a crisis in the sense that like people are fleeing a flood. This has all been paid for. These are essentially, the advance guard of an army." But then the question is, well, who's doing it? I mean, it does seem like Russia has had a lot of involvement in these coups that have been taking place in West Africa lately. I don't know if this is like a Putin style gesture, just like poking it at Western Europe.
I'm sorry, Seth, you have to put on your blonde wig when you talk like that and say that the enemies of the Ukrainian regime will be. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. Well, I'll get it on for the next
Thank
segment.
you. Right.
But I mean, they did this a couple years ago by sending up, like when Belarus, um, like issued visas to anyone who wanted to come there on the basis that you were then expected to enter Poland, right? Like
Mm,
Belarus basically
yeah.
set itself up as a transit point. Um, this whole thing, I mean, this is what's been going on for a really long time. Obviously, it's reaching some kind of desperate crescendo. Um, what just seems so weird, and it's like in Spain, right? Spain has those two exclaves in Morocco, Ceuta and Melilla, and those are also overwhelmed and overrun by migrants, quote unquote. But what just seems so funny to me, and it's the same thing here, is that both sides, both Europe and America, just throw their hands up. Like, well, people managed to get to this little clump of dirt we call Europe in the middle of the Mediterranean, and therefore they have a right to go like anywhere in the EU they choose. They have the right to asylum hop, go find the best deal for themselves, pretend that they're asylum seekers or refugees, even though they're all young military age men. Like, what kind of refugee crisis has no women or children or old people? Um, so I don't look. It's a question of will, right? I mean,
Right.
if you want to do something about it, do something about it. If you don't, then just surrender and hide it and like lie in bed. It's hard to really. I don't see any other solution.
Well, it's difficult. Europe has always been quite vulnerable along its southern frontier, whether it's the Persians or the Egyptians or the Muslims or the Moors or whoever. Um, it's always been tough. The border has not been secure, historically speaking, for centuries on end. And when I read quotes from the mayor of Lampedusa, the one that I saw not long ago, he basically said, we just want to make money from fishing and tourism. That's it. We just want to be left alone to grill, basically. And it's a nice thought, but if you are that dependent on tourism for your economic fortunes, and then you look at the birth rates in Italy. I mean, they're terrible. This is not a nation state or a people that is going to sustain itself, even if they build the wall or whatever. So the deck is stacked against the Italians, and the attitude of, well, we kind of live in this museum state, and well, tourists are going to keep us alive, and well, we don't really need to have children. You get what's coming to you demographically if you take that kind of attitude, and that attitude has been spreading through secular Europe for quite a while. It's very difficult to reverse. It's even very difficult to slow down. The one cultural phenomenon that kept Europe from being conquered historically was Christianity. It's relatively easy to understand why that would play such a role when Islam was doing so well, conquering its way up and out from Arabia. But times are a little different now, and you cast around for something within the European soul that sees itself as really worth preserving. They like Beethoven still, so on medieval architecture. They haven't plowed the cathedrals yet. I guess they like their train system a lot.
They're good for ad space, those cathedrals. You can project.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right. Welfare benefits. I mean, it's it's a nice enough sort of cosmopolitan grab bag of benefits and charm. But it's just not enough. It's just not enough. And Europe has been chugging along for these past couple thousand years. Tried out a couple experiments that didn't work so well. Lots of wars. Population. How many hits can a continental population take before there's nothing left in the tank? It's a sorry prospect to witness unfolding. It's not like the old days when the Ottomans rolled in and they thought, well, we're the new Rome, and so we'll just sort of pick up where the Romans left off and have this resplendent civilization, and that's really not in the cards this time around. So if the lessons to be learned in Europe are going to be as harsh as it seems, perhaps those of us who are outside of Europe can get a little bit ahead of the curve, just in terms of thinking about what the real costs are to trying to just kick back into early civilizational retirement and enjoy the benefits of tourism and low birth rates.
Yeah, it's funny. That's interesting, James. It's almost like the rest of the world didn't quite get the memo when Western Europe decided that politics was over and we were all going to resolve our disputes economically now, and like trade is going to replace war. These were nice ideas, but they kind of only work if like everybody is on board, and otherwise you have a bit of a prisoner's dilemma. This was, I think, a theme of the whole Russia invasion when it first broke out, and then it was America really that had kind of ceased to really believe that bad things ever happen, that major civilizational shifts ever occur. The whole thing about, well, one person is the same as another, and it doesn't really matter if you uphold any like civilizational standards or try to assimilate new arrivals into a robust culture. This is, to me, just at this point, a matter of willful denial. There's a piece in The Economist, Italy needs more migrants, but has trouble admitting it. Which just amounts to like nothing else that you could possibly do would ever replenish your civilizational energies. Babies, you're never going to have babies. You're never going to be worthwhile enough in your own home to like make more people or try to revitalize from within. You just need to basically import bodies, and it's hard for me to feel like that is going to be anything other than a disaster. I mentioned Douglas Murray's book, The Strange Death of Europe. This stuff has been going on for a while. It's supposed to be a dangerous conspiracy theory to talk about the Great Replacement, but if you believe that like there's nothing particularly special or interesting about Europe, and that really all nations are is just masses of interchangeable human widgets, and culture doesn't shape people at all, then you might, I suppose, flatter yourself into believing that, well, it'll be fine. Like, we'll just sort of swap out one low wage worker with another low wage worker. But like, that ain't how this works. And yeah, one might hope that Americans would sort of take note.
Yeah, and the problem's only going to get worse because if one consults population charts for Africa, 1950, a little under 250 million. Now it's about 1.5 billion, just under. And by 2050, it's projected to be about 2.5 billion. So this, what was a trickle now seems to be maybe not a flood yet, but a series of steadily moving streams, and it will soon become a flood by mid-century, probably a lot sooner than that. So, what can you say for a civilization that has no sense of its own preservation? I suppose. I think. I mean, how many people in even Europe's ruling class or elite really believe that culture doesn't matter, that you can really assimilate anyone just by putting them on your soil? Um, it'll be a great test in the coming years of that proposition. And look, Italy, especially southern Italy, I mean, there's not going to be much left of it that looks Italian culturally or demographically, given just compared to its, a couple thousand years of modern history. Uh, it's going to be gone pretty soon. I mean, as you guys noted, southern Italy especially is a series of depopulated villages, and it's kind of it's runs on tourism and vacationing. You can buy an Italian house for a steal right now in lots of parts of southern Italy, and so if the people who live there don't care to reproduce and are abandoning their own civilization just through their behavior, it's hard to make the argument that no one else can enjoy the fruits of it, especially when you've spent the last half century at least convincing yourselves intellectually that the older arguments for secure borders and defense of civilization are, if not wrong, then racist. Europe's in a real pickle, and I should add, so is the United States, as you guys alluded to. We're blessed with an ocean between us, so it's harder to get over to the U.S. But what's happening at our southern border, and has been happening since the Biden administration took over from the Trump administration, means we're having a smaller version of this problem, and it looks to be pretty steady.
The one thing that I agree with what everybody said. It's the birth rate thing that kind of kills me because, yes, it's true. Italy has a very low birth rate. Spain has a very low birth rate. Europe has a very low birth rate. But Japan and South Korea and Singapore and China have lower birth rates. But, Japan's had a very low birth rate and, has been at stagflation and its economy's not going anywhere for decades now. Nevertheless, the Japanese don't seem to mind, right? I mean, they still apparently they're still pretty happy. They've got their culture. It's not in any threat of like being overrun. I mean, maybe some things matter more than a growing population. I mean, there are. I mean, I'm not saying this is like. I mean, obviously, we write about this a lot. Like, the technological solution that might be kind of a rotten apple, but I don't know. They're steaming ahead with robots to take care of their old people. I'm just not so sure that like it's either you double your birth rate or you accept unlimited.
Yeah.
This is not a great set of alternatives. I mean, that's interesting, Seth. I wonder whether birth rate is sometimes kind of a stand-in for like civilizational energy. Like there's a passage in Burke where he talks about, I don't think that any country where the population is steadily increasing can really be all that bad. He's talking about France. And yeah, maybe there's something kind of more spiritual underneath it.
Maybe that would be true if the society isn't like a failed state, like Niger. Like Niger has the highest birth rate in the world, and I don't think anybody wants to live there, including them. So, I mean, what are we supposed to say? Oh, yes, Nigerian vitalism is like that's the model.
I'm sure you can find that viewpoint expressed robustly on Twitter. No,
yeah, I just mean what I mean more than anything, Seth, is that the kind of arrayed forces of both migration and then just the habits at home conspire, especially in Southern Europe, to make this just a huge problem.
Oh, it's a total.
But Japan, Japan and South Korea too, that for that matter, but Japan even more so. I mean, have a very, very restrictive immigration policy, and they just, they're a pretty homogenous place, and so that's one way I think to manage a homogenous place with high skills and lots of capital investment, it seems, can do pretty well, even with a pretty low birth rate. Anyone who's visited Japan will note that.
They do be killing themselves and going to prostitutes a lot, though.
Yeah,
Just
it
to point out.
is. Yeah. Well, Japan, it's. I'm sure James could talk for hours and hours about this, but if you defeat that particular place in war and make their emperor renounce his divinity, and then basically hyper commercialize it, weird things happen.
Right. It's all better now, right?
Yeah.
Right? Well, this is okay. I mean, this topic is definitely not going to vanish from the news. We'll talk more about it, I am sure. We're going to actually be publishing about it. We're doing a feature on Lampedusa and world immigration in general. So be on the lookout for that at AmericanMind.org, a great website that you should read. But for now, let's talk about the hoodies and the basketball shorts. I was joking earlier. I'm wearing long pants like a big boy, as are the rest of us, but not Senator John Fetterman, the Democrat from Pennsylvania, who now will waltz into the Senate wearing whatever the hell he pleases, as could anybody else, it turns out, because Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has rescinded what was, I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong on this, always technically an unofficial rule, but a rule nonetheless that's been followed basically since the founding of the country, that you wear a suit and tie if you're a man in the Senate, and you wear a suit or a dress, or rather skirt, I suppose, formal attire, let's say, if you're a woman. Now, no longer. And so far as I can tell, this is almost exclusively to cater to Fetterman. I want to read a telling quote that Fetterman gave to The Hill on Tuesday. He says, "America, it's about freedom and choice. It's like a Burger King, a you rule kind of thing." So that's where we're at on dress in the Senate. Obviously, we are not big fans of this over here, but maybe we could start out by just asking to make the case. Why should we care?
The reason I care is because I don't like the idea of allowing the guy who basically reminds me of the big chief from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like putting him in charge of etiquette and decorum. He is so annoying. I guess he put on Twitter, he's like, "Look, if those jagoffs and the Republicans will pass the spending bill that gives you full support to Ukraine, then I'll wear a damn suit," or whatever he said. So the idea that he's tying his, uh, sense of personal freedom and devil may care and just his fake working class sensibilities but he'll give it all up if we'll just send Ukraine more full support. Um, it it just puts the lie to both positions. He's not really like some kind of free spirit. He's just a Democrat hack, LARPing as an iron worker, just like Joe Biden, pretending that he's like an anthracite miner. Um, I don't know. I mean, the guy is just. I don't understand what his deal is and why he has to walk around like an obese freshman in all weather, wearing like shorts and flip flops. But whatever it is, it's annoying as hell.
Man, you're challenging my assumption that the best public, or rather pop culture comparison to Fetterman is Uncle Fester. He had some good ones in there, Seth, that I might have to reconsider. But
I mean, it's the Senate these days is bad enough, would be my argument. You don't need to add to it slovenliness. Manners maketh the man, and have some self-respect at the very least. And I mean, what can you say about a body with whatever you want to say of its dysfunction these days? Has a pretty storied history in the annals of human history, and now you're degrading it with an accession to this I mean, it's just remarkable that that man's a U.S. senator. I'm sure there are plenty of more terrible and more effective, better dressed senators, even in both parties. But it's just an embarrassment. It's an international embarrassment, and I can't believe that they couldn't have him fall into line. I mean, I suppose it comes down to you know, the Senate is a collegial body, and he wanted to, and you know, to take votes, and wanted to quit wearing suits because the old rule was you had to wear a suit on the floor of the Senate. So I guess his vote is important enough, and they're spineless enough that they cave to Fetterman. But I mean, the man's presence alone is embarrassing enough. To allow him to dress that way as well should be beyond the pale of for any serious civilization. But there we go. There we are. We're not a serious civilization anymore in many ways.
Well, I'm afraid that the spectacle that is Fetterman is all too calculated. This guy is a senator. He can certainly have staff dress him properly before wheeling or trotting him out onto the Senate floor. It's everything about the Fetterman phenomenon is totally concocted and really just sort of forced through in a very artificial way, from the campaign to the everyday, from the aesthetics to the justification for those aesthetics. I think that this is all very fake, and I mean the guy's plight seems to be real enough, but I see all manner of calculated political moves here. Staking a claim to the downwardly mobile legacy working class white demographic, staking a claim to erasing the Senate as the institution that it has been for so long, and terraforming it into this new other thing that does not have things like rules, legacies of our oppressive past, and just the constant like victimization narrative where oh, poor Fetterman, like he's being attacked and insulted by people who are unwilling to recognize that mental health is like a real issue in America. I mean, these narratives at this point write themselves, and I wonder how many of them are at this point indeed writing themselves, automated by AI or some other network of bots. And it all just puts more pressure on American voters to start thinking the unholy thought of, can't an actual robot just do this job better than this kind of shambling figure who would be struggling as a gas station attendant? It's really unfortunate in so many ways, and just encourages all the wrong kinds of habits and indulging all the wrong kinds of temptations. And what will they do for an encore? That's my question. So, as hideous as the spectacle of Fetterman is, it is probably but a shadow cast by something even more hideous to come.
Yeah, I just want to dwell further on this Burger King quote since nobody took me up on it. I will I'll bite the bullet myself. I can't imagine a more direct and open statement than this, to the effect that all of American life has essentially been codified and commodified and boiled down to the equivalent of a fast food joint, somewhere where you go and you sort of schlep out increasingly more money for increasingly worse food, where standards are pointedly at a minimum, and really the only thing that matters is that we effectively subsist on kind of the lowest possible tier of commerce. I mean, I like a Big Mac as much as anybody else, but it's not the image that I get inspired by when I think about the supposedly highest authority, legislative authority in the land. I'm sure, James, that you could school me on this, but I mean, I just think that Alexis de Tocqueville would have had a field day. I was kind of looking back at some of his stuff about equality, and he says, there is a manly and lawful passion for equality, which excites men to wish all to be powerful and honored. This passion tends to elevate the humble to the rank of the great, but there exists also in the human heart a depraved taste for equality, which impels the weak to attempt to lower the powerful to their own level and reduces men to prefer equality in slavery to inequality in freedom. I have to say that I feel as if the whole Fetterman shtick is designed, calculated to inflame exactly that passion, that if anything is beautiful, if anything is lovely or refined or elevated, that must be an insult to you because you are not currently as beautiful and refined and elevated as this governing body, as these leaders, as these people. And so the sort of ostensible gesture here is one of kind of outreach and generosity. Well, we don't want anybody to feel bad. We don't want anybody to feel left out. But of course, the net result is to leave Americans with nothing to aspire to, nothing to be inspired by, nothing lovely or of good report that they can reach upward toward, which in the end is the whole point of any kind of honor or decorous bearing, right? That's why people have done this basically since ever, and why it's never good news when somebody says, well, we need to abolish all distinctions and bring everybody down to one level. I mean, this whole thing is just disgusting, and I actually feel like it's about more than just who wears what. It's about the triumph of a certain form of perversion in American public life.
Yeah, I mean, they're always accusing Trump and so forth of being a demagogue, but this is like exactly the same. What you and James are describing is precisely demagoguery.
Mm.
Like just this appeal to the absolute lowest common denominator. I mean, dressing for the Senate the way people wouldn't dress to go to Walmart.
Yeah, right.
Yes, there's something really gross about it. And I mean, I guess, but like to James's point, like, I mean, the left hates the Senate. They hate it more than anything, almost as much as the Electoral College, because they're kind of like, related.
Mm.
And they really want to abolish the Senate. They see it as like a completely anti-democratic institution. And so, getting rid of the filibuster, for instance, would be like a major step. So, I mean, in a way, like, well, if you're allowed to wear shorts and flip flops there, why do they get to filibuster law? If it's just like a playground,
Right.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, it's really grotesque.
There's also kind of a inherent elitism weirdly hiding here that is perfectly expressed by the fact that visitors will still have to dress up to visit the Senate. It's like, you say you're at the grocery store and you say, "Mom, hey, can we have egalitarianism and lowered standards?" And mom's like, "We have egalitarianism and lowered standards at home." And it turns out it's just like Fetterman, and you still have to wear a suit. This whole thing is like, when he says at Burger King you rule, what he means is at Burger King he rules, and that's ultimately where all of this trends. Is like there's a kind of privileged class that gets to demonstrate their total power, barbarian like, by just exhibiting their sort of slovenly debauch all over the most hallowed halls, and everybody else still has to kind of nod and show them respect. Ah, yes. I mean, they're always saying, "Oh, you need to speak decorously about this guy. You need to respect his office, or you need to tiptoe around the problems that he's had." And of course, he has had problems, and of course, the office is one that in its nature is worthy of our respect. But if they're not going to respect it, I don't see why we all should pay them any sort of deference at all. They're basically signaling that they don't believe in that sort of thing. So why should we? Um, we've got one thing to talk about from last week when we were out, and that is these Donald Trump comments about Ron DeSantis and abortion. So Trump was on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday, and he was talking about Ron DeSantis' 6-week ban, which he signed to ban abortion after 6 weeks. And Trump called it a terrible mistake. He said, from a legal standpoint, I think it's probably better to handle this at the state level rather than the federal level. And I think what he did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake. I don't find this particularly surprising. You guys can tell me if you do. Trump was always kind of leaning in the pro-choice direction, in the pro-abortion direction, before he ran for office, that was kind of his reflexive stance. And then he adopted a pro-life attitude in order to win over conservatives. Now, I think he senses that the wind is blowing in a different direction with the overturn of Dobbs. There have been all sorts of concerns and difficulties to do with, um, whether the Republican position can really work, or the right wing position, let's say, can really work at an electoral level. Seems like the electorate is not where the right is on this. And so it's been, at least currently, as presently offered, the whole, abortion ban thing has been unpopular. Many different possible responses to this. And so what I think I want to ask you guys is, if this is not particularly surprising, what Trump said, what should people think or do about it? That is, what is the right way forward for Republicans, for conservatives on abortion right now? Is what Trump said disqualifying? And if not, then how do people kind of negotiate their commitments and the necessities of politics in a post-Dobbs era?
Well, we'll see if it's disqualifying with the primary.
Hmm.
I mean, ultimately, the series of voters in the series of states that nominate or that are responsible for giving us the Republican nominee will decide whether this is beyond the pale. No, I think it's as you described, Spencer, it's pretty simple, which is Trump just thinks it's a political loser nationally. That is, 6-week bans. I think pro-life voters have to reckon with the fact that, as you said, the majority of the country is firmly in favor of some limited amount of abortion, probably early, especially early. And so, in light of that, I mean, normal calculations of prudence in politics is to do as much good as you can. So, in states where much more stringent bans are viable and popular, you do them there. You preserve as much life as you can where you can. And I think that nationally at the moment, you've got to do a lot more persuading of the electorate before you can get anywhere near something like a 50-state restrictive abortion regime, let alone a nationwide ban.
It
Yeah, I
seems a
mean,
little bit like a beggars can't be choosers situation unfolding here, where no one has been able to get to the right of Trump. And what that means, just through the logic of good old fashioned politics, is that he can drift a little bit to the left. And why not? He's pretty bulletproof right now. And it's not surprising to see him do something that is relatively in sync with who he's been and how he's sort of positioned himself from the outset, from perhaps even many decades ago. He's doing this dance on trans issues, quote unquote, as well, and it'll be interesting to see.
This was when Megyn Kelly asked him, "Can a man become a woman?" or whatever. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes,
Yeah.
and he was sort of mush on that, and then recently at one of his rallies, he said that he would keep men out of women's restrooms if that's okay.
Huh.
Uh, Raising eyebrows. So he's skipping the debates. That doesn't seem like too hard of a move to understand politically. This dance that he's doing also does not seem to be that hard to think about why he might be making these choices. And so long as the momentum continues to carry him, and so long as the base kind of takes care of itself on these issues, it will probably not be worth it to him to lean super hard into gender world and all that it entails. Uh, it's just, it's not just expedient, it's also kind of like saving up the ammunition so that if down the road things start getting choppy, then he can come out and say something characteristically shocking or whatever, and then the base will cheer and people will say, "Oh, see, no, he's coming around." I mean, these are all just kind of like standard kind of political moves that you can make or not make as you navigate what is sure to be a very bizarre and probably in some ways unprecedented political campaign. So very early, very Trump. Stay tuned.
And we should remember too that Trump has built up a lot of goodwill with the pro-life movement. He courted them. He courted evangelicals, especially. There's a lot of overlap on those issues, of course, or that group and that issue. He fought the trannies and the military issue throughout basically his whole presidency in the face of a lot of opposition, even in the military bureaucracy. So he's his instincts are, at least on the Tran thing, are pretty good. And now it's just all viewed through the prism of this upcoming national electoral fight. And we should, while criticizing Trump on these things, we should also just acknowledge that he was effectually the most pro-life president in the post-war era, without a doubt. So that's he gets a lot of credit for that, and I think that provides a lot of cover for him as he tries to tack to the center for electoral reasons.
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, remember, he's always been a little incoherent on this issue. Don't you remember the time in an interview he said that women who have abortions should face murder charges, and then he backed off of that. But and because even like pro-life people aren't like, yes, let's go after the women criminally. I mean, generally, don't they say like,
right? No,
prosecute the doctors maybe? But anyway, yeah, I mean, come on, is the pro-life movement really gonna turn their back on the guy who gave them Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Comey Barrett? I don't think so. So yeah, he has room to move, and DeSantis is kind of painting himself into a corner, I think, trying to, push the culture war thing at a time when I'm not sure that's actually what the election is going to turn on. It seems
Oh,
like
and you think it's going to be like economics and immigration stuff, or what?
I think so. I think more so. I'm not. I think that there are people like in our camp who find wokeness and DEI and all of that like really disgusting, but I don't see the entire electorate as a mass like getting behind it necessarily.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that is, of course, where DeSantis feels most comfortable, and he's got this huge record, and that's kind of what people associate with him if they feel favorably about him. But there might be a kind of inverse argument to be made in the same way that we will often say, well, you can't get all this, you can't sustain all this woke stuff when people are in bread lines and when they have no food or whatever. That might, I suppose, also be true for Republican candidates, that when people are thinking about how they're going to put food on the table, they don't really want to hear somebody talk about these issues that are very near and dear to the heart of the kind of very online right. I mean, I'm sort of torn in the heart. This is kind of a painful issue for me, just because I did see some people, some friends saying, well, if you're not like an abolitionist on abortion, then you would have compromised also on slavery. Like, it's that level of compromise. And my feeling is like that's sort of half true, except that the world is way more tragic than you're realizing when you say that, in the sense that there are, to me, some interesting, painfully interesting parallels with slavery, in that this is an issue which, for one side of it, represents a moral stain of the highest caliber, just a total abomination, and anything less than abolition is unacceptable as a goal, at least. And there are those who, like ye olde abolitionists, would say, well, if in that case, abolition now or never. Like, you just need to be taking to the streets, uh, rubbing ashes in your hair, setting yourself on fire, whatever. And the whole point of the lead up to the Civil War is that Lincoln and others were sort of trying everything before they did that, before it all kind of, before the implications of the absolutist reality kind of bore down politically. Like, the more prudent path was, and I think is, to try every way you can to not just torch the country over this, and to move toward that direction step by step. Um, and the other side, just as in the sort of slavery era, sort of thinks, what's the big deal? We can sort of, this isn't even really that much of a problem. You are freaking out over nothing. And meanwhile, the people involved sort of don't have a vote, right? Babies don't have a vote, as slaves did not. Um, and this whole thing feels to me like we haven't really reckoned with the degree to which a tragic world actually is a tragic world. And the political implication of that is that, like, prudence really is prudence. It's the, like, least bad option. It's surveying the landscape and figuring out how to move 1 inch toward your infinite goal. And yeah, I guess I just feel like this stuff hits me as hard as anybody, but I don't see any other route forward.
Yeah, I will just use this occasion to do a very Claremonty thing and recommend 2 books
Mm.
for people interested in this sort of thing. One is by Justin Dyer, who's a Publius Fellow from probably 15 years ago or so, at least. Justin's taught at Mizzou and now is at UT Austin, but he has a book called Slavery, Abortion, and the Politics of Constitutional Meaning. An academic book in many ways, but a very interesting one and provocative in all the right ways. And then this question of prudence, mob rule, etc., gets, I think, really no better discussion than can be found in the middle section of our late, dearly departed great professor Harry Jaffe's Crisis of the House Divided on the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He has this very interesting discussion of Lincoln's, these 2 speeches that Lincoln gave as a young man, his speech to his temperance speech, and then his address to the men's lyceum. And both are very, very interesting reading on this question of politics, prudence, fanaticism, absolutism, and all the rest. So uh, go get them for your bookshelves, people.
Here, and I mean, this is kind of, there's no Claremont here subject, so there's a lot to be gained from all of those treatments. I will second that, and I suppose third it if I get a third vote. And now I will ask us all to invite our listeners to read the damn site. We have a 2-week a wealth of pieces, a 2-week treasure house, because we've been away. And so I'm not going to ask everybody to pick 2 pieces, but I am going to open the floor to the last 2 weeks of pieces and ask everybody to highlight something that they thought was particularly interesting or worth your attention. I will start. My piece is called Brilliance Isn't Enough. It's by Michael Robillard. I think that's how you say his name. He's been writing for us for a while now, and I've only ever seen it written. But the title kind of says what the piece is about. Michael came to us with a question, and that is the question he asked in the first paragraph of this piece, which is, how is it that truth keeps getting its ass kicked so badly? And throughout this article, he's grappling with an old distinction, although it's not mentioned here, between the ethical and the intellectual or the cognitive virtues. We, in our current kind of diseased state, have elevated the intellectual virtues beyond all reason and out of all proportion to be capable of extremely high level computation, to have a command of a great deal of information in a particular subject, or just generally seems for us to convey a certain kind of moral virtue to a person. And so we're inclined to elevate to positions of authority people that can demonstrate elegant syllogisms and well-turned theories. But Michael reminds us that, in fact, those 2 things aren't the same. And often, especially in the moral realm, truth is found, discovered, and enacted in the political realm, which goes down to the individual and household level, but all the way up also to kind of public action, and has implications for what we might expect of our leaders and whom we might elevate to public office. This has obviously direct relevance to what we were all just talking about vis-a-vis prudence and the study, not the science, but the practice of actually making choices, not just kind of theorizing about what would be in a perfect world the best thing. There's a lot in here that is worth considering and indeed then acting upon, as the piece would imply. It's called Brilliance Isn't Enough. It's by Michael Robillard. Go check it out at AmericanMind.org. Seth, what do you got?
Piece I like is by our friend Raw Egg Nationalist called "Eating the Young to Save the Old." Raw Egg Nationalist addresses, a theme that was certainly noted during COVID and the pandemic, which was that the main focus of who we were trying to save were all people in their 80s. Like generally speaking, that was like who was most affected by the virus, and in the name of preserving them, we would like lock children away, force them to wear masks at the age of 3, make them stay at home, not let them go to the playground, like whatever. And people pointed out, oh, this is an odd way. Seems like an odd inversion of the typical way in which societies function. I guess I really liked this piece was very good, but I really liked it because I consider myself sort of a connoisseur of anthropological oddities, but he brought one up that I'd never encountered, which is this Chinese practice of gegu, or feeding, like a form of extreme filial piety, where you feed your flesh to your elders in order to cure them. And I don't know. I mean, it may just be highly mythologized. I don't know exactly how common this practice was, though I looked it up, and apparently, like even in the 19th century, they would write it up in sort of the equivalent of like Reader's Digest or things like that. In China, stories of a daughter who fed her mother-in-law bits of her flesh to help her through her, pneumonia or whatever. It's a really interesting metaphor, and Raw Egg Nationalist does a great job of weaving it into this other theme. So I recommend "Eating the Young to Save the Old" by Ren, Raw Egg Nationalist.
Come to AmericanMind.org, where you will find details not only about American politics, but about self-cannibalism in other countries to save the elders. That's amazing. Yeah, that piece is really good. And I should mention also that Raw Egg Nationalist is where I got that economist reference that I made earlier when we were talking about Lampedusa. He's worth following on Twitter as well. James, what do you got?
Well, let's talk about how the military is eating itself.
Hmm.
And not out of filial piety, not to honor those who came before, but in fact to erase those who came before. We have a couple items on the site about DEI transforming the military. Jeffrey Anderson's The War for the Military, and hot off the presses as of this moment, the transcript of our own Will Thibault's testimony on DEI and military readiness. He was up there on the Hill testifying, and we have the receipts. So give them both a look. Jeffrey Anderson and Will Thibault, who is over in DC for our Center for the American Way of Life.
Very nice. Yeah, I like that Jeff Anderson piece a lot as well. And my favorite detail about the piece is that the guy in charge of DEI at, I think it's the Air Force Academy. I need to look up the piece to remember, but it's his last name is Looney, which just is like right out of a Charles Dickens novel. Okay, Ryan, what do you got?
Yeah, I'll just add, Will is basically on the case of the woke military for us. And if anyone has missed it, Tommy Tuberville, the senator from, is it Alabama? Alabama, has been putting a hold, which any senator can do, on a lot of these promotions for military officers, which up until recently were just rote. This is sort of an unheard of practice, but he's kind of a hero for doing it, partly because they're ideologically problematic, but the real triggering event was to force a national conversation on the practice in the military of not only paying for your abortion, but paying for transportation to get your abortion, which was previously forbidden. Anyway, so yeah, Will's doing good work. Go to dc.claremont.org for more stuff. I liked, and not just because I'm a golfer, Country Club Nationalism by Logan Hall. Logan points out what many of us have known for a long time, which is that the PGA is probably the most conservative national sports league out there on average. Maybe a couple in competition, NASCAR, who knows. And on this question of decorum, I mean, Logan makes the argument. It's a variety of arguments for why we should embrace country club nationalism, the general right wing leaning of the golf community, the emphasis on decorum and good dress at country clubs, and the just wholesome, competitive Americanness of it. And so it's a fun piece and may teach you a few things you didn't already know. And it's doubly enjoyable if you happen to golf, as I do.
Yeah, speaking of decorum and attire, surely the country club is no better place than the country club to learn how you ought to behave. Don't look to John Fetterman, look to your local golfing enthusiast. I, for one, have been getting a little blowback on social media because I have returned to watching football after departing from it for, among other reasons, its woke tendencies, sort of crept my way back to it. And now, of course, I'm suffering the consequences on social media. So I guess maybe I should start watching golf or playing golf. But I don't know, man. It's just I can't, I can't get into it. But maybe, but it's a sign of my own moral failing. I acknowledge that I am the problem here. In any case, that's all we've got for you this week. Thank you all very much for listening. We have a few bits of housekeeping to do before we close out, and that is to mention that if you like what you hear and if you like the stuff we do, you can check out our other websites. We've mentioned some of them already. AmericanMind.org is the one that we here are in charge of. There's also ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, where you can find our sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books. There's our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. And finally, there's the site where you can donate to support us at claremont.org/donate. It really does mean a lot to us. We do appreciate your support. It's how we keep this whole machine running. And of course, we're very grateful to you just for listening. If you want to help us out with this podcast and spread the word, we would be very grateful for that as well. You can give us 5 stars wherever you're currently listening, or at the very minimum, you can keep your criticisms to yourself or send them to us privately rather than pasting them all over the internet, you fiends. And you can also subscribe wherever you're listening right now, wherever you get your podcasts. Spread the word, let people know about it. Thanks very much to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri. And thanks to all of you for listening. We will talk to you next week.